All right, good day, everyone. My name is Scott Lord, and I want to welcome you to the Demystifying Communication Technology webinar that PASS is doing today. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Do want to let you know real quick that we do have a question and answer box that's in the Zoom there. So if you have any questions, please send those on over to us. And I hope that you enjoy the webinar today. I'd like to go over just a couple of things that we're going to look at today. We're going to look at kind of the technology as a whole, how we can separate kind of the wheat and chaff when we're looking at emergency communications and day-to-day communications, how we're going to look at the internal and external communications that schools are dealing with day-to-day, as well as proactive and reactive communication. And finally, kind of getting into how do we do unified communications through kind of a tiered approach, through a layered approach to make sure that technology is providing all the needs that the school has now as well as into the future. We'll discuss some of the technologies that are available today and then go into questions and answers at the end of it. So I have the distinct honor of being able to welcome our three panelists today. So I want to thank them for joining us, and I'm going to start with Guy Grace. Guy is the Vice Chairman of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. Guy has served as the Director of Security and Emergency Planning for Littleton Public Schools in Denver, Colorado for over 30 years. His outstanding contributions earned him the 2020 Campus Safety Director of the Year Award, and he has received numerous other national and security industry accolades, including from the Association of School Board Officials International, Security Technology Executive Magazine, Security Magazine, American Red Cross, Security Industry, SIA, and of course, NSCA. Guy currently serves as the K-12 National Security Program Manager for ASA ABLOY. Great. Guy is a regular speaker at school safety conferences and commentator for various trade magazines and media outlets. He possesses hands-on experience in school safety technology and processes and emergency response, providing valuable insights on deploying life safety technology in K-12 schools. He also serves in various advisory roles, including chairing the Advisory Council for the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. So Guy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Add to that, I also consider you a personal friend. So thanks for being here.
You too.
Would like to introduce Rami Michael. Rami is the CEO at CareHawk, where he leads the company in developing innovative life safety communication systems designed for various sectors, including education, healthcare, correction, and commercial facilities. Prior to this, Rami held executive roles in fast growth organizations in the communication and artificial intelligence space. With a career rooted in technological entrepreneurship, Rami has an engineering degree and an executive MBA, which provide him with a strong foundation in both technical and business disciplines. With a proven track record in leadership and strategic vision, Rami takes great pride in inspiring teams and motivating purpose-driven results. So I want to welcome you, Rami, and I will tell you that resume does not do you justice. I've had some amazing communications with you on doing this, so I appreciate you being here and thank you for lending your expertise today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And then finally, Bart Wanzer. Bart is the manager of the Enterprise Solutions Specialist team at Motorola Solutions, excelling in consulting with customers, particularly schools, on integrating various technologies within the Motorola ecosystem. With a deep understanding of Motorola's comprehensive solutions, Bart guides users in optimizing their tech infrastructure, ensuring seamless communications, and enhanced safety across campuses and facilities. His expertise in uniting diverse technologies help create efficient, connected environments that ensure safety and security for students and faculty. Passionate about innovation and customer success, Bart is dedicated to empowering clients with tailored solutions that drive operational excellence. So in a nutshell, in the little time that I've known Bart, he knows his way around a unified communication structure, and I am so glad that you're here to help us out with that today, Bart.
Thank you so much, Scott. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Well, now that we have the introductions out of the way, let's dive into this. And I think we all know the infamous bubble slide that PASS created years and years ago, but it applies in almost every aspect of looking at school safety and security. There are just so many things that our schools have to deal with when they're looking at this. And primarily, we need to also be able to make sure we recognize and understand that their primary goal is to be able to educate our students. And in order to do that in a safe and secure environment, there's a lot of things that are being thrown at them out there. So hopefully today we're going to be able to provide a little bit of that. Where do we start? Where do we go? And what can we do to help make sure that the investment of time and energy and funding is done in the right way to help unify communications? So with that, we really want to begin with your best asset. So Guy, I'm going to kind of start this off with you. When we talk about the best asset that schools and districts have, what am I talking about, Guy, and how should it be used?
We're talking about people. We're talking about people that work in the schools. We talk about the people that utilize our schools. And we look at safety and security in schools. The threats that schools can have on any given day are multifaceted and complex. We hear a lot about active shooter situations. However, those of us that are school security practitioners, we know that our hazards that we may face on any given day, as I just stated, are multifaceted. You could be dealing with medical emergencies. You could be dealing with medical emergencies, natural cause emergencies, such as a mountain lion or a bear. You could be dealing with thunderstorms. You could be planning, like, for example, Hurricane Debbie out there. I'm sure there's some school districts out there that are planning and working around for their communities around what may happen with these storms. So when you think about it, it's not just an active threat or an active shooter incident that we need to be worried about in schools. We need to be worried about the all hazards. And what do we do about that? Well, the best asset we have is our people. And when we think about that, the students are also included in that. Of course, the teachers, because what we're trying to do, a return of investment for a school district, is not financial. It's the ability to bring our children to the next level after they graduate. And when we think about that in K through 12, there's multiple abilities of students to understand emergency situations in schools. You know, we look at that. You've seen one school, you've seen one school. So the best process that we need to do in K through 12 is to build a team of folks from the different areas in the schools. We and remove the silos. So you look at this graphic, for example, many school districts, thankfully, are starting to get security directors, or they'll have persons that are in charge of safety and security improvements in their school district. However, I like to say that everyone is a security officer in the school, and everyone has to be aware of the security components, and they have to unify these security components, whether it be human rules and processing, district policies and procedures, mental health, learning environment, and also the technology components that PASS is focused on in our swim lane. So when you think about that, the best asset is building a team of people in your district and in your community that support your schools for these emergency situations, in addition to helping to ensure that the learning environment will be there and be able to function and continue after all of these emergencies. So when you look at the graphic, this is just an example. Many districts will even expand this. You would have a person, the primary leader. Then you would have the IT folks. You would have an integration team when it comes to security technology, such as having your integrators, your architects, your hardware, your video management folks. It's pretty comprehensive. Those that would be involved in putting your technology and having representatives for that. But we also look at the internal structure of the district, the administration. We need to think about the processes, the budgets, the staff, the logistics, and the standards, but also that interoperability, because when we look at that, we're here to enhance the learning environment. So we cannot exclude those that are responsible for the ABCs, the learning experience, because that's what we're here to do. We're not here to impede the learning environment. We're here to enhance the learning environment. And then we look at the community. We look at law enforcement. We look at fire. We look at medical. We look at mental health outside the community. We look at the different focuses, groups, partnerships, such as the American Red Cross or the National Association of Schools Psychologists, or, for example, the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools. When we look at this, it takes a community to keep a school safe. People are the best asset, and that's what this slide conveys. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Guy. Well, Rami and Bart, I'm going to kind of start with you. When we look at all the people that are involved in communication, what are some of the things that you see in the marketplace that kind of makes it difficult when you're being asked about communication technology? What are some of the insights that you could provide when we're talking about, hey, we need the information from the people and what's going on out there?
Yeah, so there are a lot of really great points that you made there, Guy, and I really like the breaking down the silos aspect, right? I think that's one of the biggest keys when we look at communications is having the ability to communicate across the board, figuring out who the people are that need to be there and give them the right assets so they can have those conversations, right? Opening dialogue, I think, is the key when we're looking at making sure that things are working the way they need, that people are getting the information they need to. That typically starts with kind of going to a unified system, having the ability to have multiple people on a system that can communicate with one another, figuring out who needs to have what conversations. For those people who don't need to have traditional radio conversations, how are they responding? How are they talking? How are they reporting incidents? So some of the biggest keys that I would advise schools to look at when they're going through and looking at communication systems, right off the bat, right? Who needs to talk and what are we doing to address the situations when something escalates, right? And then based off of that, finding the right partner to work with to figure out how to get that right technology to make what you want happen. So I'd say those are the biggest keys. And once you can find that in your district, in your neighborhood, just know that that's the right place to go. And then figuring out who you need to speak to, thinking about those emergencies, whether they're an active shooter or whether Tommy was left on a bus stop a little too late, right? Figuring out where we're going as far as communication needs and who needs to talk. The bus drivers, the teachers, the administrators, the parents, and just making sure that all those abilities to connect one another are there in place right off the bat. It's a lot easier to start planning in the beginning than start piecemealing things down the line.
All right, excellent, Bart. Rami, I know you've got something on this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. From a general perspective, safety has a lot to do with people, that's staff and students, going about their work and life with an alert mind, as well as being prepared for an emergency situation. But even the sharpest minds are not immune to performance degradation during these stressful situations. And so emergency preparedness is critical in ensuring that schools are safe. In our perspective, preparedness comes in the combined form of intentional training of people on processes that are infused with impactful technologies. Generally, well-implemented technology is almost invisible as it seamlessly removes the complexities that an emergency situation is bound to present. So technology, whether it's communications or alarms, etc., all of them have to be it's so simple and easy to learn that they become an integral part of the day-to-day.
Okay. And, kind of on that topic, let's move kind of forward a little bit. And Rami, can you kind of talk to me a little bit about the importance of kind of having those processes in place in order for us to start looking at how we really can start putting the communication technology together?
Yeah, of course. Processes have to be simple. They have to be trainable and they have to be easily repeatable so that they can take all of the various locally relevant risks into account. Guy mentioned weather and wildlife, for example, and plans should be rehearsed regularly to ensure that everyone is aware of their roles and responsibilities in the case of an emergency. Our mantra is that technology has to be simple to adopt so that it can become almost invisible, as I had mentioned. But processes surrounding the technologies have to also be simple and easily repeatable. They must have access to reliable communication systems so that they can notify staff, students, parents, emergency services as the need arises.
Great point. Great point. Guy, I'd like you to kind of step in that. I have seen in the industry and, have seen it when I work with districts as well of tell us what your communication can do and we'll change our process.
Well,
which I discovered isn't necessarily a great idea. So with your experience, tell us about the importance of that people and process before we start diving into the technology.
Well, I think what we have here is a fantastic graphic here. Analyze the need in your school district. What we're trying to do is enhance that learning environment. And as Rami and Bart had very comprehensively said in a briefly way, probably that I could do, it's all about the ability to take away as much as possible, enhance the security awareness, but also to reduce the fear. Fear does not help with a positive education outcome. So when we talk about that team, the first thing we always talk about is we look at the risk assessment and analyzing the needs within our audience. So, or the people we serve within the school district, what I mean by audience. So we look at that, and then our team develops the ideas, and then we create the prototypes and the type of components that we're looking to do, the policies and procedures, and the district roles and processes. Because when we're doing this, yes, you've seen one school, we've seen that comment, you've seen one school, but it's important when you're doing and developing the processes that you do this as a district comprehensive endeavor. It needs to, as we talked about, include all of the team members and that community and all those that serve that school to understand what your communication processes are going to do. And after you do that, you should do a test and evaluation. I love that graphic because we look at the layers of protection. We think about communications, what we're talking about here today. It goes through all of the layers of protection that we see on that right graphic. It starts at the district level. It will go to the property perimeter. It will go to the parking lot perimeter. It'll be in the building perimeter, and it'll be in the classroom interior perimeter. And all of these technologies need to work together because we can't just stand on our own. As you'll see in some slides later in this presentation, we think about communications that, a lot of us will think that will just be radios, or that may be the speakers that we use, the intercom systems in our schools. No, it's comprehensive because we need to, number one, unify all of the life safety systems to work together, components, but we also need for every occupant to be empowered by those life safety components through whether that be advanced protocol integrations, but when we talk technology, but also how we use these tools and how they're going to notify individuals of when emergencies are taking place.
Great point, Guy. Great point. Bart, you have kind of a unique place where communications, you probably have every piece of hardware available with the Motorola solution. So how do you, what are some of your recommendations when we're talking to a school of looking at their processes instead of diving into like one piece of technology or say, this is the solution we need to solve? What are some of your recommendations that you have for districts of kind of making sure we're looking at that bigger picture?
Yeah, and I really like the layers of protection slide here because I think that's the perfect way of going about it, right? Figuring out your district-wide communications essentially leads you to having those communications internally, right? Being able to talk from school to school or within your district already gives you that technology that you need. So if you start planning for district-wide communications and being able to have interoperability there, you're already starting to build everything out from the orange slide or for the orange box to the blue side, right? Just having those technologies in place and figuring out the people that need to have those conversations and what's going on, essentially creates that system for you. So having that, plan in place, like we're analyzing the need, developing the ideas, testing and evaluating on that district-wide level, will already create that environment for you. So it's very easy to just start, building things out from there. But as a baseline, it's very important to figure out how you're going to have those communications from, whether it's an administrator or, like I mentioned, how you're going to reach out to your bus drivers as they're going from school to school and dropping kids off. So we know emergencies don't always happen during school hours, so it's important to have plans in place for those really important situations. And then as we have that system in place there, then it's important to start looking at how are we communicating out to the communities, right? Not only between the schools, but once an incident's resolved or everything kind of goes okay, how are we relaying that information out to our parents? So communication goes a lot of different ways. Figuring out high level and building in is the best way to start, in my opinion.
All right. Thanks, Bart. Appreciate it. Since you're talking about that, of kind of doing that layered approach and making sure we're looking at the people and the processes and who need to communicate, what communication technology do we use? And I'm going to start off with asking you, Rami. I mean, every manufacturer out there who works in communications got it all taken care of, right?
Well, not quite, but I like what Bart has said there. We see communication as internal communication as well as external. Internal meaning within the boundaries of the schools, or even outside of that, within the boundaries of the district, talking to staff and students and everyone within the environment of the school or the district. External communication extends that to the outside, to the community, the parents, emergency response and first responders, etc. But I'll take a moment to talk a little bit about internal communications, as we see a fair amount of, not going to call it confusion, but a need for clarification as to what is required. And we often see schools turn to third-party providers for solutions to lock down, lock out, shelter in place at an added cost. And we all know that budgets are hard to come by, and especially capital budgets. And so what we would like to say is that many schools already have technology in place that is capable of most, if not all, of these needs. So, for example, many schools have an intercom, public address, or an all-page system in place for internal communication, such as morning announcement, prayer, bell schedules, tones, generally all the internal communications required to keep the train on the rails and on time. But also, modern intercom and public address systems are now capable of much more. This internal communication technology can essentially become the tip of the spear in emergency situations to communicate to staff and students what to do and in a timely manner. So the biggest requirement for priority communications utilizing existing infrastructure is to deliver the notification reliably to all occupants of the school in these events. Also, internal communication needs to automatically include connected buildings and locations, because an emergency often extends beyond the perimeter of a single school. And in some cases, the entire district, as Bart has mentioned, may be required to enact an emergency response. And you've seen also in a previous slide that in the past guideline, the district is the outer layer for safety. We often talk about active assailant scenarios, but in some parts of North America, weather and wildlife emergencies, bears, coyotes, etc., are a lot more prevalent, and these scenarios require coordinated emergency response from multiple schools within the district. And we talk a fair bit about these high-profile events and emergencies, but really, let's not forget the importance of ensuring that the day-to-day activities run without a hitch. Many emergencies are in the form of medical needs or to diffuse altercations. So simple technologies that are high value but low share of mind, such as synchronized time, are really instrumental in maintaining order. Now, there's also a need in a lot of cases for high value, high visibility technologies such as ADA compliant visual signage. And these are important for areas in the school that are inherently loud, such as workshops and the like. And these require clear visual instructions to make sure that those guys are safe as well. But really, if we take a step back and we think about it, and overall, a school that is responsive, well-run, and prepared can potentially be less likely susceptible to bad actor scenarios. And that's the crux of being proactive, because ideally, preventing preventable emergencies is the right approach. And those are my thoughts on that, and I'll give it back to you there, Scott.
Thanks, Rami. I think you made some really good points there. And so, Bart, if you and Guy, I'd like to have you follow up as we talk about this, because one of the things that Rami mentioned here, and we mentioned a little bit earlier about making sure we kind of break down the silos when we're talking about communication, and how we're making sure that the communications need can fit all of those. And it doesn't that means that there's not necessarily one system out there that's going to do it all. But Rami also kind of mentioned that there's a big component here from a signage aspect, a visual aspect that a lot of times we haven't discussed. So would you what are some of your thoughts as we talk about that, from what technology we use, the importance of kind of making sure that our technology can all kind of interface together?
Yeah, and honestly, I think off the bat, the best thing to do is really evaluate the options that are out there, right? Knowing how things work, knowing the vendor, the supplier that you're working with, and what they have, and how it essentially can work together. I think that's a huge value add. Once you start looking at different vendors at different schools, things start to get a lot messier than they should be, right? So really evaluating things beforehand, doing some due diligence and finding out what the products look like, what the technology really looks like, how things integrate, can really help you down the line. Another thing I would really say is getting your IT people involved, or whoever is going to be responsible for this involved beforehand, is they're going to be the ones that are going to be maintaining the system. And one thing that you really mentioned, Rami, that really stood out to me is that proactive versus reactive communication, right? And when we're looking at solving for a proactive situation, it really helps out, right? Once you start finding out things before they really happen, it really makes those reactive communications a lot simpler. You have all your things in place. If things really hit the fan at some point, right? Getting before that incident takes place can help those reactive situations where there's not so much of a mad dash, a mad scramble, all this confusion that's happening, and having those processes in place, with the right technology that's very simple to use, makes things a lot easier and makes those situations go by a lot faster. So I would say, really starting off the bat, evaluate the different options that are out there. Talk to people, reach out to different school districts, reach out to different vendors, try to understand what's out there in the market today and how you can utilize that to really understand what's this technology that I want to be on, what platform I want to be on, and how is this going to grow with me? How is it going to grow to meet my needs?
Excellent point, Bart. Or Guy, I want to kind of have you jump in too from the school perspective. I think kind of what I'm hearing is that one of the things is that we have to look at it from a district-wide approach, but two, that might actually mean standardization. Oh my gosh, does this mean we can't bid, and we're not being agnostic, that kind of thing? Can you kind of look from the district, from the school side that you've been in, of the importance of making sure that everything works together?
Well, here's a lesson learned for myself, and over those years, especially after the Columbine tragedy and those community events that we faced in Colorado. The biggest lesson learned was, as the slide says, one size never fits all. But using these as Rami has stated, like, for example, using these technologies for day-to-day business is a good way to ensure that they're going to work, because not just using them for emergencies. So like we think about intercoms, right? Intercoms are used for announcements to direct students to their next classes, to announce the events of the day. I mean, those are things that we are good. When we think about radio communications, using them for day-to-day business, for example, hey, I need to get Sally out of classroom K3 or whatever that's going to be, or communicating on the playgrounds with our communication system, and using those communication systems just, for example, day-to-day keeps people in practice. The problem that we have is when people don't practice with these things for day-to-day business, because that's where the confusion may come in. Is, maybe you're drilling, you may have a communication component and you only use it when you do an active threat drill or a tornado drill or something to that case. If you're using these things for day-to-day business, that builds that redundancy, and it's going to allow this to be utilized in a purpose and also enhance those abilities of those people to use those tools. Another point was brought up about, being agnostic, and, the key to that is, yes, that's very important, because when we're looking at these technologies, we need to be unifying the technology to the communications components together. And there might not be partnerships that are developed with the vendors, so to say, but where you're developing that partnership is, as we talked about in that team, is in your human roles and policies, or your emergency preparedness practices, is using these different technologies for the occupants of this buildings. I can tell you, in an active threat situation, we had about 11 years ago, for example, we had children that had extreme mental disability, for example, maybe they have Down syndrome, or, or birth defects and those things. And we look at the case of those types of students. They're in K through 12. So or that someone may be visually impaired or hearing impaired, is having these communications devices clearly displaying what is going on for that occupant to be able to assess that information, or assess that information for the staff that is caring for those individuals, and making sure that we keep them safe through, keeping them functioning through day-to-day business, but also keeping them safe when the worst happens. This is what communication does. It's basically the day-to-day business, but it also, when the worst happens, is the ability for these communication technologies to enhance that ability to respond and be prepared for these incidents as they may arise. So, as we're going to hear from Bart and Rami, we're not just talking about loudspeakers. We're not just talking about radios. We're talking about multiple technologies, video management systems, access control. We're talking about the audio systems. We're also talking about student accountability systems, visitor management systems. I mean, it's endless what is being unified into that. As Romney stated, a lot of these things are already in place. So what we can do, they're built for purposes, and they're tools for those occupants of the building, but we can unify all of these systems through our communication technology and the other components to work together to make these situations, and for us to mitigate through these situations that we have in school districts every day.
I think you're absolutely correct, Guy, and just love the discussion of just how we need to look at how we unify, and that there's multiple platforms that go across there. Bart, Rami, do you guys have any comments on that before we head to the next slide?
Yeah, I did want to mention, so great points. Right, having things that work together, solving for those proactive situations versus reactive. In the end, we want to make sure that we're prepared for every situation that can come up, right? Having things that can talk to one another, that can then send out information to the people that need to get it, is key in this specific situation, right? Mainly because, as I'll always stress, being proactive always helps out more than being reactive. Like we've mentioned before, when things start going awry, people's emotions start to get included in there, and that's when things can really start to degrade. So it's really important have the procedures in place, to have things that can speak with one another, to have integrated technologies. And again, one size never really fits all. But it's important to also know the pieces that you're bringing in have the ability to communicate with one another and then give you the information before something really goes wrong.
Yeah, Scott, we're going to talk a fair bit more on the tiered approach to unified communication soon. Generally speaking, on the topic of processes and training that is impactful, it's important from our perspective to standardize on certain technologies so that it's simple to train, and the training doesn't need to be completely overhauled when certain staff leave schools from one school to another within the district, which we see quite frequently happening now. And so making sure that technologies that excel in their domain can be adopted at a wider scale within a district, I'm of the opinion that it's something that many school districts should consider strongly, so that the training and drill processes are a lot simpler, so that they're repeatable, etc.
I think that's a great point. And, to be honest, you guys have kind of moved right on into kind of identifying those communication needs. When we're looking at being able to have a holistic and unified approach to the technology, you guys have really already kind of discussed some of the bullet points that we have here. So I'm going to kind of open it up to the team, maybe have you start, Guy, of just encapsulating what we've already kind of said as far as looking at those needs and what are some of the ways that we can start kind of boiling it down so that we can now start saying, okay, here's how we start looking at applying technology.
Well, I look at here, for example, you look at these bullets, they're really defined. But when I look at it all, it's all about proactive communications. Okay. What we're going to do on a daily basis to enhance the learning environment, keep it safe, and can do the continuity of business, which is teaching our students and educating our students for the next level. And as everybody has stated, keep it less fear is more proactive for academic performance. That's the return of investment for schools is academic performance. So when we look at proactive communications, that would include all of the others. So when we think about external communications, that's very important, where our team is coordinating with our law enforcement, our other responders that may come to the schools, our parents. We see that often too, where there's a mass notification that goes out by email or text to parents when there's a emergency situation at the school. And that's really good. But also too, when you're putting out that information, being quite clear what is going on. If it's vague and ambiguous, you're going to create more of an emergency situation because that wasn't deciphered out there clear. So that goes back to your district roles and processes and making sure that your processes are communicating correctly to your audience. And then we need to think about too, when there's a lockdown at a school district, for example, in one school, as Romney said, you're going to have every other school is going to be impacted in that school district, in addition to the other schools in other school districts. Because you think about it, we're taught as school safety practitioners, as security directors or law enforcement, when there's an attack on one school, you need to be thinking about, could this be a coordinated mass attack from a terrorist attack of other individuals? Could this be a diversion? I mean, there's things that school districts have to think about. So when one incident impacts a school district, a school in a district, it impacts the others. And that's why it's so important. If I'm in a lockout at one school, that's why it's important. I have a school that's 30 miles away. I still need to communicate and let everybody know that school is in lockout and understand why it is, because that might impact district resources, transportation, and other services that may impact or may be needed for the entire district. But most importantly, we look at too is internal communications. How are our students, staff, and our visitors in a school going to be communicated about these emergency situations that are going on inside the school or outside the school. And we need to do it accurately and as much as possible to reduce misunderstandings and not promote fear where it is not necessary. There are times too when if we have an active threat situation on our campus, it's not about fear. What we're doing is with these communications, for example, is promoting the ability through these communication processes, we say in PASS and other emergency protocols, what do I need to do? Do I need to shelter? Do I need to do an evasion component? Or do I need to do carrying component? Or at the very least, or maybe I might have to be prepared to defend myself. The processes are endless and the hazards are endless, and we need to do this proactively without promoting fear. So when we think about reactive communications, we need to be specific during what our instructions, and we also need to have the ability to automate as much as possible the procedures and the processes for our occupants and our external stakeholders to deal with these emergencies. Hope that made sense there. That's a pretty
Absolutely. Rami, Bart, did you have any kind of additional comments on that?
I have some comments on this slide here. Yeah, for sure. We start to think about internal communications and how critical they are, and they absolutely are. But there are some things that we have to make sure are done right for internal communication to become a proactive deterrent to emergencies. And those are you must make sure every corner of the school is covered, whether it's via audio or visual signage. You have to make sure that also the various needs of the personnel and students in the school are covered. For example, there are plenty of schools now that for students and staff with disabilities, and so you have to make sure that your communication strategy covers those requirements. And so generally you need to do that from within the confines of one school, but you now need to expand that to the entire district so that you could have priority communications triggered by a district office that for certain will reach all of the administrators of the school that you're trying to connect to, so that you could forewarn them about a particular event that's going to take place, and that if a lockdown is to be triggered from the district office, that they're aware of it within minutes of or so before the event takes place, so that they're prepared. And that is a very key component of being proactive and not necessarily constantly reactive in a lot of these situations.
All right. So I think that kind of leads us into kind of our next step. And, that really what I'm hearing from this team is, the technology should meet your communication needs. And with that are some technologies that we all kind of see in our schools, and things that we kind of focus on sometimes maybe in that siloed approach where we look at it. So one of the questions that I have for the team is, when we're looking at the different communication mechanisms that we have now, what are some of the ideas and suggestions do you guys have as far as taking that and bringing it more into a unified approach?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start by saying, finding a solution that's, and I think we mentioned this before, something that's simple, right? Getting the most simple solution in place for you to start using, to be familiar with, simple, and I'll start on the radio side, right? Simple, key up the radio, talk, release, listen, right? That's the basic needs of communication. Next thing you really need to know is communicating across the board with different technologies, mass notification, and having a system in place that can really make sure all that stuff really works together. Kind of looking at what we do with Motorola, that's kind of our approach is making sure that the technologies that we put in people's hands have the ability to work together. You don't want to create those silos. Having things opened up to different technologies, whether that's your mass notification tool, your radio tool, your intercom, your paging system, all that stuff really needs to have some ability to somehow integrate with one another, right? Automation is the key to making sure proactivity really happens. Making sure that things are in place before something occurs and that communication goes out easily and is really easily accessible is the key to making sure that the technologies that you have really work. And I will say, ease of use, I will always stress that, like I was mentioning, you always really need to make sure that you're working with these systems, you're trying them out on those situations where it's not a dire need, where it's not, emergency happened, but knowing how to respond in those emergencies, how, when an emergency happens, how that communication's easily dispersed, how you're receiving that information, whether it's through your traditional radios, whether you have that mass notification tool, whether it's, sending things out over an intercom, whether it's sending things to digital signage, right? It's important to know these different scenarios and having the technologies. I would say figuring out what's out there today is very important. But just knowing that there is a lot of options out there, interconnectivity is the major key to making sure that you have everything in place and you have something that's going to continue growing with you as you keep, maybe growing, or as you keep adding on different technologies, or as more things emerge down the future, right? That's where I would kind of start with.
Yeah.
So let's dive right into it, actually. And Rami, I'll have you kind of start it off. Well, I think we are talking about kind of that unified communication. So would you want to kind of talk a little bit with what Bart was saying of kind of keeping it simple, and how do we get this started? So how can we tell our group, we look at the processes, we're looking at the people, we're looking at the procedures, and we have these, I won't call them disparate or siloed, but we've got these different technologies that are being thrown at us. So how do we start putting this together?
Yeah, there are a few themes that continue to develop on the conversation here today. Technology unification specifically is a very important need from modern technology platforms. Most schools have several standalone security systems that need to be operated independently. However, the integration of these safety tools allows emergency solutions to complement one another. It simplifies connected processes, such as triggering a lockdown, and it reduces the number of operations needed in times of crisis. In fact, integrated technologies that function in unison allow schools to focus their efforts on their response. When done right, the value of combined technologies is tremendous, where the whole can really become much bigger than the sum of the parts. These technologies then become the so what for one another. To give you an example, when a teacher initiates an emergency call in from their classroom, you may want to trigger a camera on, or lock or unlock a door, or perform certain other actions that from experience and locally relevant risks. Those are things that you would want to do. So instead of running to talk, as well as locking doors, as well as turning on cameras, it all becomes daisy chained all together. And the thing that I would add to what Bart has mentioned earlier is technology integrations come in various shapes and forms. It really requires an integrator that knows how to put all of these concepts together. And in many cases, they are both hardware type integrations as well as software type integrations that are becoming a fair bit more prevalent nowadays. And in some cases, they are absolutely required. For example, Scott, we've talked a little while ago about this example of when an integration is required in an active assailant situation where the emergency solution requires that fire alarms be suppressed so that priority communication of the higher risk takes precedence until the situation is resolved. And so there are plenty of needs and requirements there. Scott, you're very familiar with this topic, so I'll send it back to you and ask you, what do you think?
Well, I think that what we should focus on, to be brutally honest with you, and this is kind of a great topic because this is a question that's come up from our group. And if there are other questions that are out there, please feel free to send them to us so that we can try to get those answered towards the end of the webinar. There are codes that are out there for mass notification, and they are wrapped around fire protection and weather emergencies and things of that nature that are really good tools to help schools kind of look at how do I take a tiered approach. Now, unfortunately, and I'm a code geek, so I love writing the code and reading the code, it's almost indecipherable. So one of the things that we can do, and we're going to talk a little bit about this on our next slide. So I wanted to, I'll just kind of preface that with, we're going to get to that here in a little bit, as far as some of the things to be looking out for as you're going and looking at doing your approach. So what I'm hearing from you, Rami, and would look like, comments from Guy and Bart of, it's really trying to understand, for me, maybe I'm dating myself now, the Staples Easy button. How do we make communication easy and intuitive? And so as we're looking at this, from that technology aspect, if we have, people that are on this call going, okay, tell me where I should get started, and how do I start moving that forward in an approach, whether we're looking at the layers from the district wide or we're going from the school out, maybe can you kind of give us some insight on how do I get started on that, and making sure that I am looking at the focus that we're seeing here on the slide of the fact that everything is going to kind of interface together. But, where do I start of how do I make sure that these roles and processes are easy and that the communication technology is going to fit what I want?
Yeah, I can take that if that's okay. I think the best place to start at is looking at what you have today. I think any good integrator would say, let's see what's going on in your system today. Let's see what you have for video security, for access control, for communications, and see if that's possible to reuse it or maybe amplify it in some way. If we're looking at communications and radio, I think it's always important to have some sort of system, back-end system in place, just to give you that ability to have mass notifications, to send out emergency alerts to different areas when they need to be sent out, and then building off from that. So first off, having some way to have, key up a call or send a mass notification, someone receives it, and being able to talk, like I mentioned, across the campuses in your districts, that should be where you should always start at. And then starting to look at those other options of, hey, these are the cameras that we have, or these are the access control, and then figuring out how those really talk together. What we're doing, at least Motorola, is, having alerts that come from different avenues that get sent out, to different technologies, right? Whether we mentioned Rami, whether that's an active shooter or a gun that's been drawn, or in a different situation, a license plate detection comes on a hit for your principal that's coming, to your campus, and maybe we should unlock the doors because the principal's cars rolled through, right? But I would say at the very base, communication and the communication system that you have should be where you should start, and then just start building off from there to solve for those proactive situations, to not be as reactive, or to have policies and procedures in place when those situations start becoming reactive, so you know how to act, right? But at the very core of it all, I would say, district-wide communications any kind of communication when things kind of go in a radio sense, right? In those emergency situations, sometimes we'll see LTE towers go down, your cell phones aren't working, but having a robust system in place that's going to ensure emergencies happen. Let's have something that's going to stand the test of time, stand through the weather situations, stand through all that, so that when I grab my radio and I key it up, someone on the other end's hearing me and someone else can respond back. That should be the forefront of unified communications, I would say.
All right, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm gonna kind of move us forward a little bit quick here. One of the questions that was brought up, and I think it works well when we're talking about some of the blind spots and things to be aware of, and Bart kind of mentioned it as well, is one of the questions is, in the education market, are there industry or technical standards that need to be considered when purchasing mass notification or emergency communications? So I will kind of start on that one. As I said, there are requirements in NFPA 72 and Chapter 24 as far as what's required for fire alarm and emergency communication. NFPA 1600 is actually a guideline that helps say these are some things, or this is the way that you should look at approaching your process when you are going to use the fire alarm system that might have a voice component to be used with other emergencies. So one of the things, and I know this is kind of a long answer, is that if you are not using the fire alarm system that has a voice component as your emergency communication system, there really is not a technical industry standard out there. Is that fair to say? So yes. I'm going to ask this team, we've kind of talked a little bit here about fire alarm code, and Bart made a comment about making sure we have redundancies and things like that. With a lack of a standard that is necessarily out there, what are some of the things that our schools should be looking for when they're looking at purchasing mass notification emergency communications, as far as some industry or technical guideline that can help them through this? Guy, you want to start?
Well, I think I want to just say something that on that last line. I've seen firsthand this stuff, what we're talking about, save people's lives firsthand. When we think about that and interoperability with the radios and the devices and the components, firsthand save it, mitigate loss of lives. Those things haunt people like myself forever. But when I look at that, what did that inspire us to do as a school district in the past? Like for example, looking at our fire alarms and our mass notification and using our fire doors for partitioning off in active threat situations. So having our fire doors closed was something that we were able to meet with the doors, and also to override the fire alarm with the recent, for a lockdown situation, was another type of code enhancement that helped us to mitigate through active threat situations. In addition, the ability to announce tornado notifications or weather emergencies over the intercom system was very important. But what I'm trying to say here was, what has happened is, thank God, this has fostered an interoperability and making things being very useful from the fire side to the security side, which is not very regulated, as we all know. But when we look at the fire side and having that enhances that ability of those unregulated security components to work together and bring great tools to our learning environment. I know we don't have time, but Rami, Bart, please weigh in. I don't want to take this whole slide.
Yeah, we've got about a minute left. So I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and kind of weigh in on this slide. While we do, some of the resources that are available, I'm putting that slide up now, that people can look for, where they can find information and some technical standards and guidelines that are available. Rami, Bart, final comments.
I'll be real quick. One of the blind spots that we see especially with the proliferation of IP-based technologies. And what I've mentioned about software-based integrations is there's now a more pronounced need for cybersecurity, and that I don't see as part of many conversations, but the threat is real and it's strong, and a threat has evolved from school safety directors looking to keep people from the outside getting in, but now it's become more of how do we make sure that people inside of the network don't get access to critical infrastructure where they can do a lot more harm from within. So cybersecurity is a major topic of concern here that needs to be constantly addressed. And the other one is the forethought about the systems that are being connected all the way from the beginning. So you need to really think about the various systems so that you're not halfway through an implementation process of these safety systems and realize that, hey, I should have gone with a different technology because now I cannot integrate communications with video management or other technologies.
Bart, final comment, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I do have to say all great points by Rami and Guy here. I just want to echo exactly what they said. Everything's starting to go to a digital IP-based kind of network. So making sure that you have something strong and secure to vulnerabilities is very important. I'd say it's a huge one. Also, just right off the bat, like Rami was saying, making sure that you're not pigeonholing yourself into a specific technology, but understanding what technologies you could go for that could connect to other ones is going to open things up for you a lot. So making sure that figuring out what the vendors are, what their options are, and figuring out the integrators to do that, I think that's a very big key, especially in different areas that you're at.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I want to thank everybody who joined us for the webinar. Do encourage you to look at the guidelines that are there. We've got a couple questions in the chat, so I do want to make sure that if you can grab these phone numbers or emails that are here. We have one question about ability to control your fire doors. Be able to lock them remotely. And I think Guy's going to go ahead and answer that one. So again, guys, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with you guys. And hopefully for everyone that's here that this was beneficial for you. And thank you again for joining.